It's session 3. You haven't rolled a single dice, your party has talked their way out of every scenario in their bad French accents, and you are just dying to hit something with your +1 flaming broadsword. Perhaps you've had a mismatch of expectations or gameplay styles. I'm sure this has happened to you. You've joined a campaign, but then this kind of rub happens because you've had a difference in either expectations, preferences, or even play styles that were never discussed. I think that this topic is just a little bit more nuanced and digs a little deeper than things like touchstones or even genre examples into something I'm going to call domains. Domains are the idea of GM or player preferences. However, before we dive into this topic, I do just want to give a quick disclaimer. There are only 2 metrics by which you should judge the game at your table. Are you having fun? And are your players having fun? If the answer to these questions is yes, then you are playing the game the right way. If your players are coming back week after week to roll dice at your table, then none of the rest of this really matters all that much. You can skip this one. In fact, all the rest of this advice you hear online is secondary to those 2 questions. If you and your players are having fun, don't worry about what us talking heads are saying online. Just keep doing what you're doing. Now sure, there are plenty of things we can learn and master as we continue to run games, but if the feedback you're regularly getting from your players is that they're having a good time and little needs to change, then just take that as encouragement and keep doing what you're doing. But maybe mix-matched expectations aren't the only rub at your table. It could be something like scope of your game and longevity of it versus things like life BS. Actually, go check out this video if you want to hear more on that topic. I found it really interesting, and there's not enough eyes on this channel right now. And now, with that out of the way, I do want to talk about this idea of GM domains. Greetings and welcome to Elder Goblin Games, the universalist TTRPG channel where the DCs are made up and the stats don't matter. I think that one of the hardest things to gauge while running a TTRPG is whether or not you and your players' styles will match up. Now, there's one thing to be said about running different systems, but going beyond systems into different playstyles is an important discussion to have. Let's take 5th edition D&D as an example. I know for a fact that there are game masters out there who never roll initiative or do combat in general, or OSR players who have very socially driven games. So just remember that system is not the only factor when coming to the table. So on this topic, I decided to conceptualize this idea of a spider chart or a radar chart. It's something that looks a little like this. Well, either the triangle or the pentagon. I'm going to show 2, so stick with me. I think the idea of this spider chart covers a variety of GM playstyles and can be a useful tool for you and your players when starting a new campaign or game. I think one of the most difficult things about this hobby is a lack of what I'm going to call a shared language or an understanding in different terminology. GM or player preferences, what we think is fun or important within our tabletop role-playing games, can be wildly different from person to person. I think most of us are very aware of the different playstyles, and we definitely know what we don't like when we see it, but sometimes it can actually be pretty hard to pin down what we really do like or what we prefer in our own games. So I'm going to show you 2 different charts I've come up with here. The first one is this little triangle, which I'm calling the 3 basic axes, and the second is a pentagram. And the second is the 5-pointed pentagon, which I'm going to call the 5 GM domains. If we put these styles into a triangle or radar chart, we are all likely to have strengths that put us in between 2 of the points along one side. Few game masters are actually going to be dead center. But to really dig into the nuance of these examples, I'm going to go ahead and expand us to the 5-pointed GM domains. So let's turn this triangle into a pentagon, adding storyteller and simulationist. But first off, what do these terms even mean? Engineer? I'm going to break down what I think these terms mean, and you guys can leave me comments telling me if you think there are better ways to explain this or better definitions for these. We'll start at the very top with procedural. Procedural are those GMs who prefer codified rules and stick very close to rules as written. Some of them may feel they have a hard time implementing things if they're not written in ink within the book. Now let's move to the right and look at something I'm going to call engineers. Engineers understand the machine. These are rules as intended. They love to tinker and create new things and don't mind bending the rules to make them work. Freeform. The rules are more like guidelines. These GMs play fast and loose, and momentum is king. Storytellers. Now, these are the folks who care most about the drama of the story. They care about the characters and their backgrounds, and most importantly, narrative. And last, but certainly not least, is what I'm calling simulationist. These folks are concerned first and foremost with things like realism via the mechanics, tracking resources, and maintaining a sense of fairness to the game. And just as a quick example of someone who I think sits right between simulationist and procedural, are the people who play a combat-centric game that almost starts to feel like a board game, something akin to Gloomhaven. But hold on, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's talk a little bit more about these terms and dive into the chart. Let's just say, for example, you're one of those tables who prefer a critical role style game. It's all about the improv, it's all about acting, it's all about your characters, their emotions, and the backstories that you've written. Well, if that's the case, then the strong points on your chart are probably freeform and storyteller. You're going to be having a game where people are talking in character and story is the most important thing on the table. And maybe on the other side of that chart, there are those who prefer a very procedural, very simulationist style of play, something akin to maybe a West Marches game. A game where you might be tracking rations, torches, hours in the day, and you have very established frameworks for things like overland travel. If that's the case, your chart might look a little something more like this. Then there's the one I'm calling engineers. This actually might be one of the more difficult ones to pin down, because while they do enjoy the frameworks of a game, they aren't afraid to and even enjoy tinkering with things and pulling them apart just to put them back together. And I'm willing to bet that if you've ever made things like homebrew rules to your game, there's probably a decent chunk of GMs out there who have a large portion of engineer within them. Now, these are just a couple of examples, and I'm sure there are plenty of other adjectives out there to maybe even better describe these different styles of play, but I think that most different styles of GMing will fall somewhere on this chart in between the different points. Maybe you are the rare GM out there who fluctuates between things like combat, exploration, and social, and you really don't fit quite in any one category here. Maybe you really do put in the time to make strategic combats and procedures that really make sense to you and your players, but you don't shy away from the narrative. And that's fine. Your spider chart can look something like this. The point of this chart isn't to force someone into a mold or to tell you exactly what kind of GM you are. It's so that you can better communicate to your players at your table what kind of game you plan on running, and even what your preferences are within that. Because, let's be honest, sometimes you sit down at a table, everyone starts talking in third person, and you're like, I had a whole character planned. I wrote this long backstory. What am I going to do with it now? And maybe that mismatch in expectations drives you away from playing a certain game or with certain people. And this might be a way to just avoid that kind of awkward situation. I do believe that one of the linchpins to keeping a game together long term is having a shared language and a way to describe things you do and don't like about gaming. I mean, how helpful would it be to be able to shoot a message to a potential future GM before a game even starts and just say, hey, I really am looking for like a simulationist style game with a lot of procedures, maybe something similar to a hex crawl or an old school feeling game. But see, even saying old school is where we can get into some trouble, right? I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation about what an OSR style game means. In fact, it's terminology like this with no exact meaning that's part of the problem in my opinion. You could ask 5 different people what they think an OSR game is, and you'll probably get 5 different answers. The point is, rather than biting your tongue for weeks on end, wouldn't you love to be able to approach the table and say, hey, I'm really looking for that simulationist style game, almost akin to a board game or a hack and slash, where we're just killing monsters and getting loot and clearing out dungeons. Dungeon crawl classics style fun. And yes, sometimes systems do cut out the middleman and allow you to just play in that style, but not everyone is going to be a procedural player and run a game to a T. There are just so many loose genres, ideas, and terms floating around in this hobby space that a lot of folks don't really have a strong identity of what it is they like about games. When everything is cleared away, what do you actually enjoy about role-playing games? And sure, my spider chart isn't perfect, and maybe it's not even the most efficient method to talk about this. It's just my wacky, zany, half-baked, wild hair of an idea that I came up with that I think is maybe even just a starting point or a foundation to begin having this conversation. I just think this is a topic that deserves more attention than it gets because, yeah, it's not flashy and it's not going to make a cool headline on a YouTube thumbnail, but I think it's really important. Let's get this conversation started and just more out there in the TTRPG sphere. Leave a comment below if you think there are some better terms or better points or domains that could go on a chart like this that better describe what you think covers the different playstyles. In some ways, I'm still new to this hobby myself, and if there are better, more concise terms available, then let me know. I would love to have a better shared language for everyone playing tabletop role-playing games. My goal here isn't to sort of reinvent the wheel. It's so that we can better understand what we want to use that wheel for, and to hopefully save ourselves from joining groups whose ideas of role-playing games don't at all align with our own. Wow. That was a lot of wheel analogies and got a little cheesy there, but hopefully you understand what I mean. And I also want to say that I don't mean this in a sort of combative, preferential way. I just think it could be a tool to help us better temper our own expectations when joining a new table or game. Okay, well, hopefully that makes any sense at all to someone out there, and hopefully you can use things like this spider chart, or maybe even someone will create something better that we can all use to talk about tabletop role-playing game preferences. Hey, by the way, if you really like what we do here at Elder Goblin Games, and you want more folks to see things like this and share in these conversations, then the best way you can do that is by liking, subscribing, sharing, or leaving a comment. It really does go a long way. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and there's something useful or actionable that you can use in your games at your table. Don't forget to check the description below for links to things like our Discord where we're having ongoing conversations, and the Patreon where I'm starting up a Shadow Dark West Marches game very soon. Spoilers, my chart might look a little something like this for that game. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, go ahead and sign up on the Discord or check out the Patreon. Okay folks, well as always, thanks for watching and supporting me here at this channel or caring at all about what some other idiot goblin has to say on the internet. I really appreciate it. I'm surprised I've made it this far, and it's because of folks like you. So, genuinely thank you. I've had a couple of recent collaborations that were really fun for me. I was on 2 episodes of Runehammer's RPG Mainframe, and I got to talk with Baron Darab at MythicCon. If you haven't seen those videos, please go check them out. Also, I have a much older video where I talk a little bit about expectations, but it's starting to feel a little dated to me, but feel free to check it out if you want to. Alright folks, that's it for today, but as always, make mistakes, embrace the chaos, and most importantly, have fun. gmuary. Well, it's a month where game mastering's a little less scary. But we can put down our torches, let someone else carry burden of running the game. gmuary. Can we try another system that's a little more varied, so we don't have to burn out until we are buried? And now it's time for gmuary.